Well, hello and welcome back to House to Home. I cannot believe that this is our final episode of the year. We're so excited. As always, my name is Grace Youngson. I'm alongside my co-host Joseph Kohm, and this is a podcast brought to you by Family Policy Alliance Foundation. With it being the end of the year, we thought that it would be a great idea for us to actually look at the year ahead. I'm so excited for 2026. This is going to be a big year, and we just want to give you an overview of what families can expect in 2026 with regards to law, politics, and the cultural debates that are going to affect parents and children across the country. You know, we think that some of the biggest questions facing families aren't necessarily going to be decided in newsrooms, but rather in courtrooms and state legislators this coming year. So we're going to break down some of these cases for you and just give you an overview on what 2026 has to hold. Joseph, could you start us off with the big picture?
Absolutely, Grace. And you're right. I can't believe we're at the last episode of 2025. I mean, what a year it's been. We started this podcast here. Our supporters and their community have been terrific to us. So that's why we wanted to look ahead and cast a vision for what families can expect out of 2026 and what issues might have to come up at their dinner table this year, and hopefully equip them with some analysis for how to think about those things and anticipate them with hope and with faith in God. So with that said, as a general summary, 2026 is going to be an enormous year for parents and families, probably a landmark year, maybe even a historic one, depending on how certain things go. We are going to have at least 3 major Supreme Court rulings before the end of June on 3 cases that impact FPA issue areas directly. And you and I are going to talk about those more specifically later in the show, but those cases are generally going to cover the issues of women's safety in athletics and opportunities. They're going to cover medical decision-making for children and their parents and the freedom of speech and religion of their healthcare providers. And they're going to cover a lot of parental decision-making and free speech, and also just pro-life advocacy in a post-Dobbs world. The Supreme Court's rulings are going to have a huge impact on that. And then on the policy side, you're going to see, hopefully, what we believe at FPA will be a banner year for the restoration of parental rights in the digital age, so that parents can actually exercise their right to direct the upbringing of their children online and keep them safe from predatory actors and companies online. And then finally, we've got an enormous midterm election in November of 2026, where family issues will be front and center for these numerous state races. You had over 30 governor's mansions up for grabs and control of Congress and the Senate. So, Grace, it's going to be obviously a huge year, I think, upon understanding all that and the preparation work we've been doing at FPA. What have you been thinking about as you've been taking in what's at stake in 2026?
Yeah, I think my first reaction was just thinking about this as a year of such opportunity. I think that each of these cases and all the things that we're going to cover represent opportunity. And that's a very exciting thing for me. And I think that as you, as our audience, we want to share about these things with you so that you know the opportunities and what's at stake and how you can take action and be in prayer to stand for your values. And so, yeah, I'm just excited. I know, every new year is potentially new opportunity. It's that fresh start. And I think that especially coming out of the Christmas season of rest, we're then ready to just go full force and do what God's called us to do. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I think that's a great theme for 2026, Grace, is opportunity and the incitement that's commensurate to that opportunity. Because I think the lawyer in me is primarily thinking about, at least in the near term, those 3 Supreme Court cases. And I would never say, when people are looking for an organization or individuals to lend their support to you, you never want to pay for past performance. That said, past performance can be an indicator of future performance and success. And I can very thankfully to God say that FPA has had an extraordinarily successful record at the Supreme Court. God's given us incredible victories when the laws that we've written and helped get passed in the states have been scrutinized by the court, and we have a winning record. So this is a great year of opportunity for our supporters to get involved and invest in us, not just with money, that we appreciate that, but with their time and with their energy and their prayers, because we have 3 more cases that I think we're going to win on. not to mention all the policy victories we're going to see, the impact of the national election. This is a year, as you said, of opportunity, and we think FPA has given our supporters a good basis from which to lend their support to us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking about these cases that we want to get into, Joseph, I'm excited for the first one that we're going to talk about, which is Little v. Hecox. It's all about girls' sports. So for our supporters who are familiar with our Save Girls Sports campaign, this case is potentially a big deal for that. So Joseph, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is the one case of the three that we have not yet mentioned on this program, so we'll spend a little extra time on it here. But Grace, you set that up very well. Our supporters will hopefully be familiar with FPA's Save Girls Sports campaign. If you're not, you can explore that on our website. The banner is right there on the beautiful homepage that Grace helped design. And you can see about the extraordinary success God has given us and our state family policy councils in protecting girls' opportunities in athletics for actual girls, not men who are under the delusion that they think they are girls. And so FPA has worked on this for over 5 years. All the way back in 2020, we were the original nonprofit lobbyists on the ground supporting Idaho State Representative Barbara Ehart, a hero in this movement, when she got the first state-level law passed that protected girls' sports just for girls. And so since then, we've worked with our state family policy councils, of which there are almost 40 around the country, to get 27 states to pass versions of that law, which is just a miraculous victory. And in Little v. Hecox, as you said, Grace, every one of those state laws is at stake. The specific case in question, Little v. Hecox, does revolve around that original Idaho state law, but now you have 26 other states with a vested interest in the outcome of this case because they have similar laws. So Little v. Hecox will be argued before the Supreme Court in oral arguments on January 13th. So right out of the gate, less than 2 weeks after New Year's, I, Dylan Jeremiah, our Vice President of Government Affairs, and a few other FPA staff members will be in D.C. that Tuesday outside the court supporting the parties, and we'll be at a rally being put on by our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom in support of the plaintiffs and in support of women athletes around the world. This is an enormous signal to them what the Supreme Court allows to go forward here to protect the hard-fought rights and opportunities that female athletes, by virtue of just being human beings and also because of their hard work, they deserve this. So we would invite everyone who's listening to be in prayer for this case. Again, January 13th, the case will be argued before the justices. Later that week, the justices and their teams will conference and decide essentially how they're going to rule and what their justification will be. And then we will learn about their ruling when they issue their opinion in probably around June of next year, though any of these rulings could come as early as April. I candidly suspect it will be June because the court likes to save its more controversial rulings towards the end of their term. Their term ends right before the 1st of July. So you can expect to see those there then. We at FPA will obviously keep you as informed as we can on this because we think this really matters. It matters to us, and we think it matters to all of you. If you're listening to this program, you're inclined to think men and women are different, and they both deserve equal rights and opportunities, and they both deserve safety on the athletic field. So that's what's at stake in Little v. Hecox, and we're just excited for that. Like I said, opportunity, Grace. Opportunity is the word of the day. What an opportunity this is to shore up women's rights. And for those who live in a state without a Save Girls Sports law, I would just encourage you, especially to be following this case. And hopefully when our side wins, you have all the more reason to push for a law like this in your state so that your women are finally treated fairly on the playing field.
Yeah, I think that this is huge. I mean, as a woman myself and someone, I wouldn't necessarily term myself an athlete, but I love sports and I love fitness. And I I just can't imagine what it would be like to give so much of your life into something and then have that unfairly taken away from you. And so I think this is huge. And this is huge, as you said as well, for women's rights as a whole. And this is huge. It's interesting. You actually mentioned this in some of our conversation before, that dads are some of the biggest voices on this when it comes to standing up for the rights of their daughters. And to me, I just see such a beautiful picture of family in that. And so this isn't just about this issue. This is about family as a whole. This is about the respect and protection that women and girls deserve. And so, yeah, it's an opportunity and it's really exciting.
Yeah.
So thanks for
I
sharing with
couldn't
us about that, Joseph.
I couldn't agree more, Grace, and I'm so glad you brought up the dads. I'll just add, as a policy advocate who's been in some of these state houses where these 27 state laws have been passed, the most powerful voices in favor of these laws are obviously always the women who have had to play against boys. We think of big names like Riley Gaines, who lost an NCAA national championship to a man swimming for the University of Pennsylvania's women's team. But often as well, besides them, there's something about the voice of a father standing up for his daughter that makes a dramatic difference on this issue area in these state houses. And this is not to diminish the voice of moms, too. We all know how powerful mama bears can be, particularly in the realm of politics and law. But I would just say there's been a lack of dads standing up for the women and their families in this issue area. And the courageous dads that have, we all know who they are. I would point everyone to our friend Billboard Chris on X. What a great advocate as a father he is for protecting children from gender ideology. Every dad can be like Billboard Chris. Chris would agree with me when I say that. So I would just encourage the dads that are listening, if you feel led, especially if your state doesn't have a Save Girls Sports law, which you can check whether it does or not on our website, your voice is desperately needed and can make a dramatic difference.
Absolutely. I totally agree. You know, I think that this year, coming back to the idea, the sentiment of opportunity, it's an opportunity for families to stand up. And, you know, these different cases that we're going to talk through, they're perfect. I don't want to use the word opportunity again, but they're perfect opportunities to make your voice heard in that. So it's exciting. Joseph, I know that we're also expecting a result on the case First Choice v. Platkin, and we actually just did an episode on this. But could you just give us an overview of that? That one is another big case that involves, you know, the pro-life issue and pregnancy centers.
Yes, and beyond even that, I would argue all of Christian ministry and nonprofit work, Grace, is at stake in this case. So minimal stakes, we can say. I'm being funny there, but like you said, we did just cover this case in a really excellent interview that our friend Sean Highland from New Jersey Family Policy Center sat down with us for that to talk about this case and the oral arguments. So we really thank Sean for that. I'd really direct you to that episode. If you haven't listened to it, it should be very, very close down on your feed next to this episode. So I'll just cover this case very briefly, since we'd like you to listen to what Sean has to say as someone a lot closer to the parties here and to this issue. But essentially, First Choice Women's Resource Center is what we would call a pregnancy resource center. They serve women in crisis pregnancies, vulnerable women who are dealing with unplanned pregnancies, and they provide them with alternatives to abortion, anything that they might need to enable them to provide for them to carry their children to term and find a healthy home for that child later. Like a lot of pregnancy resource centers around the country, sadly, First Choice Women's Resource Center has been targeted by the New Jersey Attorney General and his staff. And they issued subpoenas to First Choice asking to get all the names, addresses, and phone numbers of First Choice's donors. They're asking for their donor list. And that can only be, the only possible purpose for that is to target these donors. They say they're trying to they want to call and survey these donors to see if they feel misled by the Pregnancy Resource Center's advertising, but during oral arguments, Justice Clarence Thomas made clear that they've had no complaints about any kind of deception like that. This is a hit job, pure and simple, because the New Jersey Attorney General does not agree with First Choice's pro-life stance and their work to save babies and provide for mothers. So I say this, yes, a lot of pro-life work is at stake in this case, as you correctly said, Grace, and layered on top of that, this has implications for whether hostile state officials can get donor lists and information from any nonprofit, whether they be churches, or any kind of ministry, or even beyond that. Think about if your nonprofit is not religiously oriented. A disappointing ruling in this case would mean a lot of exposure potentially for donors of any nonprofit. So lots at stake. And again, I'll just wrap up that summary by directing our audience. If you haven't listened to it yet, please go listen to the great interview Sean Highland gave us about this case, because he's there in New Jersey and knows everyone at First Choice Women's Resource Center. So a lot to watch out for in that case as well next year.
Absolutely. And I would also add that this isn't even a radical pro-life case.
Hmm.
They are literally just offering help to women. They're not necessarily like going after abortion.
Hmm.
This shouldn't even be very radical. Should a woman who is in a difficult situation, an unplanned pregnancy, be able to get help and other options and alternatives to abortion? Why are we even debating that? So I think that's really interesting about this. And yes, definitely go listen to the other podcasts to get the full lowdown. You can also check out our After Row campaign on our website to learn more about what we're doing with regards to the pro-life issue. So yeah, looking forward to that case. And then the last one, Joseph, we also covered this in another podcast. And this one has to do with counseling, conscience, and freedom of speech. Again, it's another freedom of speech issue. Can you tell us a bit more about this case?
Sure. This is Childs versus Salazar, which regular listeners to this program will remember. Grace, we did a live episode recapping this oral arguments the day after the case was argued before the court. So folks can scroll a little bit down in their feed to find that a little bit further than the Sean Hyland interview. But so a quick recap, because I do think at that time we were a lot closer to the case when we recorded that. I would encourage our audience, if you want to know more about what I'm about to say, you and I go into much more depth about that, Grace, in that episode. But Childs versus Salazar is a case challenging what's been termed an anti-conversion therapy law in the state of Colorado. So this case is particularly close to home for FPA because we are headquartered in Colorado. But about 22 states have these laws that broadly define the term conversion therapy and then require that their mental health counselors not do that in any of their treatment for children with gender dysphoria or children who may identify as being homosexual. And so when I say the term conversion therapy, Grace, I'm sure our audience, because they're good-hearted, normal people, they think of the barbaric procedures that used to go on in the last century, things like electroshock therapy and things like that, to try to, pain someone out of their homosexual feelings. And that, like I said, was barbaric and wrong. It was never right, and no one does it anymore. But the insidious nature of these laws, like Colorado has, is that they so broadly define the term conversion therapy that it includes simply talking with a patient if they express a desire to not have their homosexual feelings anymore or to not feel like they might be the opposite sex anymore. To normal talk therapy would just be helping them come to terms with that and figuring out how to identify as their birth sex or how to be attracted to the opposite sex. The conversion therapy laws so broadly define what conversion therapy is that it includes that basic harmless talk therapy, even if that objective is exactly what the patient has said that they want. And so obviously that's a serious problem for mental health counselors because many of them are people of faith, or maybe they're just intellectually integrous practitioners. They have too much integrity to say, my patient wants to achieve this outcome, but here the law will not allow me to help them achieve that outcome. And so this case is being brought by a really courageous counselor named Kaylee Childs, who has challenged this law in Colorado. And the ruling on this would have implications for all the other 22 state laws, including the state I sit in here in Virginia. And the bottom line is this, is the Colorado state legislature and then their solicitor general who defended this law at the case essentially admitted to saying that we as the state know better than parents, kids, or mental health care professionals about what's best for children who are struggling with gender dysphoria. Therefore, we're going to force mental health counselors to be a part of this pipeline that moves kids from schools and clinics all the way to gender transition procedures. And we don't care about your religious beliefs that may make you object to it. So this case is critical for religious freedom, for freedom of speech, and for freedom of practice, and even beyond that, freedom for healthcare patients to choose the healthy outcome that they want to achieve through treatment. So again, that case has already been argued, and we expect the court to rule on it between April and June. I think I've communicated the urgency of that case. Again, if you want a lot more, I go into a lot of depth on what I heard in the oral arguments in that case in our earlier episode. We would just encourage our audience, please pray here because not just vulnerable children and their health care is at stake, but mental health practitioners and their freedom to practice according to their conscience is absolutely at stake.
Yeah, and I would also mention I did an interview with a lady, Elvira Syed, and she actually shared a story of her daughter. It's a pretty heartbreaking story. ended up going down this whole transgender medical route, and her mom was really pushed out of it, even when her daughter was a minor. And it ended up in her daughter committing suicide after being on testosterone for a while. And it is a tragic story, but I think that it just goes to show the importance and the gravity that this case holds. So, yeah, definitely. If you want to take a listen to that, you can find that on our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple. It's one of the previous episodes. But thank you, Joseph, for covering these three cases. I think we're gonna go to a break now, right?
Yes, let's go to a break. When we come back, we'll talk. We'll get away from the court for a change and start talking about our policy efforts next year.
Sounds good.
Imagine your child, confused, isolated, hurting. And instead of help, she's offered hormones. Instead of love, he's handed a scalpel. This is not care. This is not compassion. This is experimentation. Right now, in America, children struggling with their identity are being pushed down a one-way path. Puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, irreversible surgeries. These procedures cause sterility, loss of sexual function, permanent voice changes, heart issues, and scars that don't just stay on the body. In many states, these drastic medical interventions can happen without parental consent, or even knowledge. Once it's done, there's no going back. But hope is rising. Across the nation, people are saying, enough. Help Not Harm laws have passed in 25 states, protecting children from irreversible harm and ensuring they receive true, compassionate care. Real help means real counseling, real support, real healing. 80 to 95% of children struggling with their identity will reconcile with their biological sex if left unmedicated and unharmed. This movement is growing, and with your support, we can protect every child in America from dangerous ideology and irreversible procedures. We're fighting in every state. We're working with Congress, and now with federal momentum on our side, it's time to take this to the next level. Your gift can stop a child from being harmed. Your support fuels the laws, the lawsuits, the lobbying, and the healing. Give today, give generously, because kids need help, not harm.
Welcome back. We are going to be turning our attention now to our policy work. You know, we just covered some big legal cases, but there is a lot of battles that will take place in state legislatures this upcoming year, and we are very involved in making a major push on App Store Accountability Acts. Now, this is something we have talked about before on the podcast. It is something, again, that I think is extremely important, especially when it comes to protecting kids. In the era that we live in, I honestly think that the greatest threat to children is online. Because, you know, it has to do with them being exposed to negative things, but it also has to do with their eternity, their salvation, their worldview. And what the vast majority of the online world is pushing is definitely anti-God. And so it's so important that parents have the tools that they need to protect their children. And, you know, there's that scripture, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's older, he won't deviate from that. And I think about that. This is all about giving parents the tools to train their children up, to guide them, to protect them. And so we're really excited about this big push for this. I know, Joseph, you're especially passionate about all of this. So why don't you tell us a bit more?
Sure. I'm really excited for what 2026 is going to bring with parental rights and kid safety. online. And Grace, you led into that really well. You're right. We've at least mentioned the ASAA on House to Home before, but we haven't talked about what we're actually going to do to implement it in the States. So folks might remember our interview with FPA's brand new inaugural senior fellow, Melissa McKay. Melissa McKay now has that association with FPA as under the senior fellow title. Well, she wrote what's called the App Store Accountability Act and was the most influential person in getting it passed in its first state, which was the state of Utah. And Melissa is now a worldwide expert in internet safety, and she's on our team now. So me and Melissa are going to work together along with the rest of the FPA team this year to try to get as many states to pass good versions of the ASAA in their states as they possibly can. We're looking at about 30 states that are going to move on this issue in some way, shape, or form. We're basically going to go to battle with big tech companies because big tech does not want to be regulated in this way. And I don't want to mince words when it comes to that for our audience so they understand the forces that we're up against. Big tech, every big tech company, Meta, Google, YouTube, Pornhub, you name it. These are monsters. They are enormous entities with nearly unlimited resources, and they are deploying all of them against pro-family advocates like us at FPA, like Melissa, like our state groups and our national allies in this issue area. We are going to go to battle with them in the state houses this year to get as many ASAs passed as possible. And we're so focused on this and so invested in it because, as you said, Grace, we agree. FPA has carved itself out as a worldwide leader in internet safety for kids and reasserting parental rights online. And we believe that the greatest dangers to kids right now in the 2026 is online, and that parents must have the tools to protect their kids. And right now, in most states, they don't. We believe it's a parent's right to direct the upbringing of their children. There is no differentiation there between the real world and the internet, and so much of growing up now is done on the internet. Right now, parents do not have the tools to protect their kids and direct their upbringing online. The ASAA would dramatically reverse that. So we see our work in passing ASAAs as restoring parental rights online so that parents finally have the tools to direct their kids' upbringing whenever they pick up a device, whether it's a smartphone or an iPad or whatnot. So just real quickly, I'll explain what the ASAA does. Right now, if you open up an iPad, and I did this yesterday, I literally bought an iPad at Costco about 24 hours ago, and I open it up and you turn it on, you log in with your Apple ID, right? So much is already there, but to get to a lot of what you want to do, let's say I want to go on to Instagram, I have to download the Instagram app from the Apple App Store and then log in. Well, when I press the download button on the Apple App Store, I am assenting to a set of terms and conditions, which is just legal speak for an enforceable contract. And the thing about enforceable contracts is only adults can legally enter into them because children do not have the capacity to enter into any legal agreements. But right now, kids can download apps doing the same thing that I just did, press download on Snapchat or Instagram, assent to those terms and conditions into a legally enforceable contract with no warning. They can't possibly understand what they're consenting to, and that puts our kids at risk. So that's one thing the ASAA would fix is no more binding agreements and negotiations with minors like that without parental consent and authority and involvement. So kids won't be able to download apps on their own anymore on a device. Secondly, it requires accurate age ratings for apps. So right now, when you go onto the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and you're scrolling for Roblox or Angry Birds, you'll see a rating next to it for the content. Well, Apple doesn't rate Angry Birds for content. The developers of Angry Birds do. And because they're trying to make money through these apps, they have an incentive to rate them as low as possible for the lowest level of age groups. Now, Angry Birds aside, I don't play Angry Birds. It's probably pretty harmless. But there are plenty of other apps out there with graphic violence, graphic sexuality, and graphic language that are rating their apps for 12 years or younger, all because they want to get as many young customers in as they can. And they're totally unregulated. So the ASAA requires that apps on app stores have accurate age ratings so that parents are aware of what they may or may not be allowing their kids to experience when they let them download an app. Those are just two of the main aspects of the ASAA that we have time for today, but I say those two because they're the most pertinent to the parents that are listening to us and to those who care about parents being able to direct the upbringing of their children. So Melissa and I are going to work together with our state groups and host regular coalition meetings to strategize on how we're going to get as many of those bills passed in the states in 2026 as possible.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that overview, Joseph. I want to turn our attention to Washington for a moment. We know that Congress is actually already talking about another major legislative package, what some are calling the next One Big Beautiful Bill. And I know that we have Dylan Jeremiah, who we already mentioned, on in Washington, D.C., working with people on that. But how do family issues fit into that, and what does our involvement look like?
Yeah, it's great. This is where we get to brag about Dylan behind his back because he's not here to be humble. But Dylan is FPA's Vice President of Government Affairs and our absolute hero on Capitol Hill for our team, for our supporters, and for family values. And he'll be working with our coalition partners to make sure families are not provided for, but that their values are protected in the next One Big Beautiful Bill, which will be a big funding package essentially. And listeners might remember we had Dylan on the program earlier this year when the original One Big Beautiful Bill was passed. He talked about how our pro-life coalition and our allies on the Hill had successfully ensured that in the first One Big Beautiful Bill, big abortion companies, especially Planned Parenthood, were finally defunded. This was an enormous victory that the pro-life movement has been working for generations, for decades. And I remember when we got this done, it was amazing that we finally did, and we celebrated. But we would go out and tell people about it who support us, and they were in shock, like almost in disbelief. I had to say it twice more often than not, thinking, did we really do that? We really defunded Planned Parenthood? And the answer is we did. We did it for 1 full year as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill. So as part of this second One Big Beautiful Bill, we will be looking to do the same thing. Dylan will be representing our values and our pro-life efforts there on the Hill with our pro-life coalition partners to not just defund Planned Parenthood and big abortion for another year, but hopefully to defund it for a long time in the future. So Dylan will be working with members' offices and their staffs, going door to door on the Hill. He'll be meeting and working with our coalition partners to really advocate for this particular provision in the next One Big Beautiful Bill next summer.
Yeah, it's so exciting. It's awesome. Talking about Dylan, he's brilliant at what he does. And so, for our supporters, you have a great representative representing you and your values in Washington, D.C. And so we're excited about that. What about the last thing we want to touch on is what about the midterm elections, Joseph? Mm-hmm. Obviously, that is another huge topic for 2026. What is on the ballot? What should people be looking out for? And how would you advise families to move forward with wisdom in voting?
Yeah, it's a big election in November, Grace, as you said. And our supporters know FPA doesn't engage in electoral politics. So we're not here to endorse candidates or tell people who to vote for. That is not what we do. We do represent family values and God's design for the family in elections as issue areas. And that does allow us to engage on ballot measures that are not about political candidates, but about amendments to state constitutions, for example. And given that that's what our focus is, there's no way to deny that the 2026 midterms will not be enormous because primarily the control of both federal chambers will be up for grabs. So depending on how many Republicans versus how many Democrats get elected, we may see a change in control of Washington, essentially. And we might see, 2 more years of Republican control of both the Congress and the Senate, or you might see what we would call a divided government, where you have a Republican president and a Democrat-controlled House or Senate, or both. All of that is very much up for grabs. And so for that reason, what we'll be doing at FPA is making sure that family issues, which are already poised to be big deciding factors in this election, will be front and center, and that candidates will have to discuss them and make their positions clear, particularly on transgender issues, on pro-life issues, on funding for places like Planned Parenthood, things like that. Besides Congress, I do want to state that there are, I think, 30 governor's mansions that will be voted on in November. So 30 states will be electing new governors, and that could have an enormous impact, obviously, on our state legislative work as we try to pass good bills that we either need governors to sign or need to be able to override their vetoes. And then finally, several states will be facing what we would call amendments to their constitution on popular ballot measures that deal directly with our issue areas. And here I can mention specifically the state that I live in here in Virginia, the Commonwealth, we will be voting on two, I would say, anti-family ballot measures. So one will be a ballot measure that would remove all restrictions on abortion in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is significant even for a very abortion permissive state like Virginia. Right now, you can get an abortion up till 24 weeks in the pregnancy with some exceptions after that. This would erase all of that. But even beyond that, if this ballot measure passes and amends our Constitution, it will remove all safety requirements for abortion. So you won't need any kind of licensing or healthcare requirements to be able to perform abortions anymore in Virginia. There will be no reporting requirements, so we'll have no data on how many abortions are not just committed, but how many complications there might be in abortion procedures, how many women might die because of abortions. All of those requirements or even hopes to get that information will go away. You won't even need a physician or a nurse to perform an abortion anymore if this passes in Virginia. So that's just one of the two ballot measures. The other one would essentially erase the distinctions between men and women at law, and what that would do in effect is erase women as a distinct category in the Virginia law. So it would essentially replace our definition of biological sex with one of gender identity. So it couches itself, or it markets itself as a gay marriage amendment for Virginia, which is already legal here. But by doing that, by replacing sex with gender identity, it would also mean really the end of women's sports and women's rights to their own private spaces, like bathrooms and locker rooms. And that would, I would say, it would do away with the long fought for rights for women that all of Western civilization has been working for. It would do away with them specifically here in Virginia. So FPA will be working with our state partners like Virginia Family Foundation to engage on behalf of family values in at least those specific aspects of our election, because they're nonpartisan. But that's what's at stake. This has been I've just given you a small window into what to expect in November, but it's going to be a tumultuous time. And I know we all hate elections. If you're listening and you hate politics and you hate elections, we're with you. This is exhausting to us. And we don't think no one should be faced with a choice like that, for example, in Virginia on their ballots. But this is the world we find ourselves in. And that's why FPA is here, and God's given us a mission to represent him and his values there.
Wow, I think you said that so well, Joseph. That is just crazy, some of the things that are being argued on. Again, it takes me back to what I said about a previous case, is like, why are we even, talking about that? But again, it's the world that we live in. This is why we exist. And this is what your support is making possible, is for us to go out and make sure that these dangerous things do not get passed, do not come into play. And I think that's extremely sad about this notion of just erasing women. That's extremely concerning. And especially with a lot of these things, and that's part of the reason why we have this podcast. You said it was couched in being represented as a gay marriage kind of bill. A lot of these things are couched in one perspective, and on the surface you may not necessarily worry about it as much, but that is partly why this podcast and why we exist, is to show actually what is going on is this. And so that's really, really useful insight. So Joseph, when we step back now, you started off with a big picture overview. We went into detail on different cases, policies, and now as we're starting to conclude this, thinking once again about the big picture, when we put all of this together, the courts, the legislators, Congress, elections, it feels like a very defining year for this nation and for the issues that we work on. And I think that, we're super grateful. We actually, as we did a podcast episode on this, we released our impact report from last year. We see the wins that we've had. And now this is a year where we're going to go out and represent you and work with the Lord to win again. And so I'm excited about that. And we just invite you, if you haven't already, to partner with us in this awesome work that the Lord has given us to do. We're so honored and privileged to get to do this. And, you being a part of this, you are rewarded as well, just in the same when you partner financially or whatever that looks like. So we invite you to be a part, and we've hoped that you've enjoyed this. Joseph, what are your concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to conclude, Grace. I'll just add one further encouragement to our audience, which is at SoConCon 2025, I had the privilege of wrapping up our conference with just a very short summation speech of where we had come as a social conservative movement up to that point. And we talked about a lot of those things that folks heard in the impact and saw in the impact report. But I also previewed some of this, including Little V. Hecox and Safe Girl Sports. And what I told the audience is we've come so far, but the thing about following Jesus is we are never filled. We always need more of him, and he always has more for us. The promises of God don't grow old. They're always made new. And so I invited the attendees of that conference, and I'm going to invite our audience here to come further up and further in with us, because we're going to keep going. God keeps laying this path before us, leveling it when we need it, but leading us ever upward and onward. And we're going to keep following it. So we are going further up and further in. We would just invite you, in whatever way you're capable, whatever you feel led to in prayer, come with us, partner with us, and walk with us into what God has for FPA, but really for the American family and for all of Western civilization as we move forward. So thank you to everyone for partnering with us. Thanks for giving us such a great 2025 and for posturing us and preparing us to have a great 2026. At House to Home, we're going to bring you all of that news as it comes and so much more. And we will be back with another episode for you at the start of the new year. So if you're listening to this now, we pray that you have a really happy new year. Thank you for joining us on a weekly basis at House to Home. As always, I've been Joseph Kohm alongside Grace Youngson, and we'll see you again further up and further in 2026.